Greetings. Hello. So, Shalom, it's Thomas Daffin speaking. It's my weekly recording, really, for my, Sunday, day of fasting, reflection and study in honour of wisdom and trying to find solutions to this crisis affecting my country, the UK, and how we can persuade people that voting for the Conservatives and allowing a Brexit thing to happen in December would be an absolute catastrophe. Today's the 1st of December, so this will be my penultimate talk before the general election, so it's important. And I want to, just basically remind people of our duty to go for wisdom. We are called Homo sapiens, this strange species of creature that we are, human beings. And we have this duty to cultivate higher mind, higher intelligence, conscience, heart, love. That's our moral duty. We're only in life for a very short time, really, if you live, even a maximum like 80, 90 years. It goes very fast. And so we have a duty to cultivate as much wisdom as we possibly can. And also not just for ourselves, but for everyone else, our family, our friends, the community. That's why I'm making these broadcasts, because I feel a duty. I've grown up in Britain. I've been to school, university there. I owe my degrees to the University of London, including my PhD, all my teachers, all my fellow students, all my friends, This broadcast is in honour of all the people that have taught me from British society and culture, intellectuals over the years, decades. When I worked at the University of London, I met some incredible intellectuals who were my mentors. And then I taught at the University of Oxford, and again I met incredible people who inspired me. And I taught at the Muslim College in West London, in Ealing, with Dr. Zaki Badawi, who's now dead, who was a friend of Prince Charles, a very learned Islamic scholar from Afghanistan, from Egypt. But he'd done his PhD on a great Islamic philosopher from Afghanistan, and had studied at Al-Azhar University in Cairo as well as in the University of London. So he was a great mentor to me, as was Rabbi Albert Friedlander and others I met through my work on behalf of the interfaith world that I did for the World Congress of Faiths and the World Conference on Religion and Peace, which took me all over the world ultimately in faith-based peace work, which enabled me to set up my mediation service dealing with conflict resolution between religious faiths, and that's still the only one of its kind in the world. Underfunded, under-resourced, and no wonder, look at all the problems that are going on between religions on the planet. I wish we had, when I envisioned it, I thought of it like a kind of Thunderbirds thing, religious conflict breaks out in country X, and we immediately send a team in. And yet I'm watching in horror, slow motion, as wars break out in Syria, the Balkans, Israel, Palestine, Yemen. These are interfaith wars at bottom. The Yemen thing, Shia, Sunni, Israel, Palestine, kind of Islamic, Christian, Jewish, all in a muddle. If only we had an interfaith peace team to go and solve all these, it would only cost as much as like a couple of bombs that they're dropping on the Yemen. So if anyone wants to help fund it, that would be much appreciated. And that's my real work, stopping religious conflict. This whole Brexit thing blew up just as almost a diversion from the real work. It's such a nightmare that I've had to attend to it, because I feel like a fireman whose own fire station suddenly caught fire. So you have to put that fire out before you can help put other fires out. Because, the European Union, we all took it for granted in Britain. Those of us on the liberal or democratic wing of British politics, the left, centre-left, etc. We all felt, or the Green community, we all felt, well, of course we're in Europe. It's a great place. We just need to make it better. It never occurred to us for one second that this extreme right fanatical coup would happen, like right of centre. It never occurred to us. So we didn't bother to give as much support really to the European Union as we should have done. I mean, I did personally in my writings and work and teaching and lecturing for the University of London. I always honoured the work that the European Union was doing. I used to get the old, they used to send out a newsletter from the European Union Commission in St Anne's Gate. They would all send you a thing with a lovely blue letterhead. And I did some work with the Federal Trust for Education Research, trying to get a European Union type thing going for the Middle East. We had a study day on that. Colleagues of mine were involved. Because I sat on the World Federalist Association board in the 1980s, we were in touch with the European Union and European Federalist circles, moderates, liberals, trying to work for a rational solution to Europe's many conflicts. So I supported that. When I did my university degree at London on European history, I looked into all this. But it never occurred for me one second we'd have this extreme right nightmare developing of anti-Europeanism. We all thought that had been put to bed, with the end of World War II, and that the liberal traditions had won. I used to have my lectures for the university in Beveridge Hall at the University of London. William Beveridge was one of the mentors of me intellectually, and was a great thinker. He was born in India and a Liberal Party member who dreamt up the welfare state on the instructions of Winston Churchill. He came up with the ideas of what we take for granted: the welfare state, National Health Service, pensions, provision if you're unemployed or sick, automatically, which was premised on the idea of full employment, so which could be achieved. And my proposal for a citizen's income is the follow-up from Beveridge's ideas. That's some of my background. Now I want to give greetings on today. It's the 1st of December. And to just summarise, what I've been doing this last week is sending out a newsletter to academics all over the UK, to friends, colleagues, families, family relatives and so on. Anyone that has got a vote, ideally it's focused on people with a vote in the coming election on the 12th of December. I'm not campaigning for a political party, I'm suggesting tactical voting. So if you're a Labour member in a constituency where Labour are likely to win, where they either won last time or came second, vote for Labour. If you're in a Lib Dem area and they're most likely to win, vote for Lib Dem. If you're in a Green area, if you're in Brighton or Stroud, vote for them. If you're in an SNP area, like I am, vote SNP. If you're in Ulster and you're in an area where a Remain party can win, vote for them. That's the Alliance or SDLP or Sinn Féin. So far, the Democratic Unionist Party haven't changed from being a Brexit party, which is so stupid it makes my hair stand on end for its stupidity. Because, as I said last week, C.S. Lewis and the great intellectuals of Ulster must be turning in their graves at this stupidity. There's no excuse for it. Okay, so that's what I've said in my newsletter. I'm going to summarise its contents just in case you haven't received it. If you want it, just email me. You can find me easily on Facebook or on my websites and so on. thomasdaffin@gmail.com. Just email me. I'll send you a copy of the newsletter. Here are the contents to remind you of what this newsletter consists of. Firstly, it talks about the campaign against political lying. Secondly, it talks about the book I published, the first and only 180-page book on why Remain is so much better than Brexit. It's a detailed academic study. Thirdly, it talks about the NATO meeting in London, which is taking place in the next few days, and which will be all over the television screens. This shooting that happened, it's all very convenient. We need NATO to safeguard the Western world against terrorism. Vote for Brexit because, blah, blah, blah. The sort of mentality that's behind it. But I'm a Canadian British citizen. I'm not against NATO. I think it's important, which is the Labour Party and Lib Dem policy. But it needs transforming into a peace alliance. It shouldn't be this triumphalist thing that's circling around Russia, trying to chip off bits of the former Soviet Union's influence, like Ukraine and things. It should have become at the 1990 Paris Peace Summit, it should have done what the Warsaw Pact did and become a genuine peace organisation. It's not too late, and if I had any influence in UK politics or European politics, I would be campaigning for that. NATO could be transformed into a peace organisation in which mediation and conflict resolution would be seen as its primary duty, not conflict escalation and war fighting and so on. It's grossly overfunded and it sucks all this money out of its members, and they can't even stop the fighting in Syria when one of its members, Turkey, starts deciding to go AWOL and attack Kurds. One of the things I proposed is a NATO mediation service that would deal with conflicts that take place within NATO member states. You see, that whole alliance is rickety and collapsible if, say, Turkey really goes bonkers. Let's say Turkey suddenly attacks Greece because Greece starts campaigning for Kurdish human rights, and within a couple of weeks Turkey suddenly sends ships to invade Athens or whatever. Well, what does NATO do? What does it do? Fire rockets at them both? I mean, it has no mechanism at the moment, no intellectual mechanism to solve that problem. I mean, God forbid it's not going to happen, but you never know. Well, what I'm proposing is a NATO mediation service that would send in a mediation team immediately into that conflict and stop it immediately. What leverage would it have? Well, NATO member states are pretty powerful. They would have huge leverage. And they would say, look, unless you stop this nonsense, we will X, Y, Z. So it would need to be thinking out. I've done the architecture for it as a NATO mediation service for member states in trouble. Then, and of course, I don't know if somebody's picked up on that. Maybe it'll be discussed. I know that colleagues of mine at King's College are playing a role academically in a conference that's coming up in the next couple of days in London on the future of NATO, because this is its 70th anniversary. And there'll be a lot of patting each other on the back, generals all parading their medals saying, we're great. Well, no, I don't think you are. I'm sorry, you failed to resolve the problems of, X, Y, Z. And as a Canadian Brit, I'm ashamed that NATO has not done more to solve problems like Israel and Palestine, or to let Syria happen, or to let this chaos break out in Ukraine, which could have been much more skillfully managed. If Ukraine wanted to go independent, then fine, but it shouldn't have been egged on and facilitated by external influence. I mean, just imagine for 1 second the Russians were found to have been fomenting independence movements in Texas, and they were going back to the Alamo, and they were funding people to hand out leaflets saying Texas for independence, and then before you can blink, there's a whole Dallas independence movement going on, and they're marching up and down in the central square, and it turns out it was all funded by the Kremlin. And can you imagine? I mean, I think the American authorities would be a bit annoyed about that. That seems to have been what NATO was up to behind the scenes. So shocking, in my opinion. So NATO needs to be totally rethought, in effect rebooted. Shut the thing down, restart it as a peace organisation, and let it keep the peace properly, with integrity and with truth. The way it failed to solve the Balkan problems, and the way it ended up bombing Yugoslavia and Belgrade, again, I think was disgraceful. I don't think NATO earned its money by dropping bombs on Belgrade when it was a very complicated religious war situation going on with the breakup of Yugoslavia. I've always said that Yugoslavia should have been kept together and invited to join the European Union as a state in its own right, rather than allowing it to break up, and then letting individual bits and bobs drift in, like Slovenia and Croatia. I think Yugoslavia as a whole should have joined the European Union, on condition it stayed peaceful and peace-loving and, was a single state. I still think that given that Macedonia and some other parts, like Serbia, want to join the EU, I still think there's an argument, and this would require intelligent statesmanship, to say to these other states, look, if you reform Yugoslavia as a federation, a loose confederation, you can then join us. And, it would be difficult because it'd be unlikely they could talk Slovenia and Croatia into rejoining. But if all the other bits of former Yugoslavia reformed into a loose confederation and rejoin the EU, and join the EU, perhaps that might be something that statesmen in those countries could conceive of. Anyway, I think NATO is interesting and worthwhile, but it needs some work, and it needs some peace reorientation. If and when Scotland becomes independent, I think there'll be a debate in Scotland: should we be in NATO? That'll be an interesting debate. I would say Scotland should, only if it becomes a serious peace thing instead of a gung-ho Cold War fighting type thing. Then I talk in the newsletter about the Trump impeachment process. I talk about universities in the UK and their negative impact of Brexit on them. I talk about the incredible thing that a bunch of hardline Brexiteers went off to the Vatican at the time of the beatification of the latest English saint who was elevated, and they asked the Pope to pray for the success of Brexit. I felt a moral duty as a universalist Catholic Christian to say, well, hang on, Pope, that's ridiculous. If you're being asked by that side to pray, well, I'm sorry, I'm asking on behalf of all the decent Remain types that love our country and also love Europe and don't want this ridiculous chaos it's causing. In the name of Erasmus and the saints of Remain, can you pray for us, please? So that letter was sent off, and I give it in the newsletter, the text. This is a public work I'm doing. I'm not secretive. I also talk about intelligence and how the quality of intelligence people really annoys me at the moment, both in Britain and Russia and everywhere else. They seem to be they seem to have misunderstood what intelligence is about. They think it's gathering secrets to attack and destroy an enemy. No, it's as John Dee said, it's trying to listen in on the conversation of the angels to find out the good news for all of humanity, that we can all win. Like Mahavira said, we need to win together. There's no I win, you lose in the kingdom of God. There's we win together. We rise together in love. There's when people say they fall in love, I think that's the wrong phrase. We should rise in love together as friends, colleagues, and wisdom lovers. And that's true intelligence. That's what I call wisdom work. So then I talk about a redefinition of treason, because at the moment it's very odd. Treason is simply if you're disloyal to the monarch. But what if the monarch has gone crazy? Or what if the monarch is himself or herself being treasonous? Or what if the monarch has been blackmailed to do things against the well-being of the nation? Well, then to be faithful, would be to actually point that out. So I think we need a redefinition of treason to include not just disloyalty to the monarch, but loyalty to the people and the nation and the Constitution. In America, because they have a written Constitution, you swear loyalty to the Constitution. And if you break that oath, that's treason. Well, we need something of the same kind in Britain. It needs to be rethought. Loyalty to truth and to righteousness and to the unwritten constitution of truth, justice, fairness and peace. Because the highest quintessential thing that the king or queen is there to protect is actually peace. It was called in law the king's peace. That's why we have legal officers called justices of the peace. That notion of the king or the queen's peace is the central thing in British law, which all legal officers are sworn to protect, and sheriffs and so on. Well, that's what we as academics and as ordinary citizens should be protecting. That's what's endangered by Brexit. I'm a defender of the Queen's peace. And that is to be the opposite of treasonous. Treasonable is to create, kerfuffles that threaten the Queen's peace. And Brexit is one of them. It is a treasonous operation, in my opinion. And I think that can be shown by due diligence among researchers and scholars who've really gone into it, as I have over the last 3 years. Then we come to Scottish independence. I talk about the fact that as far as I can see, Scottish independence is now certain. There's no way it will be stopped. I know enough Scots and I understand the mood of Scotland to know that they will no longer accept anything less than full, complete independence from the rest of the UK, especially from England, because of the mistreatment of the Scottish MPs during the Brexit process, the complete cold shouldering and ignoring of their demands for justice for Scotland, which did not vote for Brexit. Brexit has cast a huge curtain between England and Scotland, and there's no way they're going to accept anything other than full independence. Yes, now this cat lived with me in Scotland for 7 years. I think she's come to agree, haven't you, darling? You've agreed that Scotland has to go independent. Can you sit here, please, so that I can read what I'm doing, or you can sit on my lap? Right, okay, so I just see no way out of that. And indeed, I think I've come round to feeling it will be a good thing, because although at the time I voted for the UK to stay together with Scotland, I realised that the English state, the English control of Parliament and state is such that the authentic voices of Scottish position won't be heard within that system. And therefore independence really seems to me a rational choice now. Then I talk about it in the newsletter. I then talk about the Northern Ireland situation and the problems affecting Northern Ireland, and I talk about the weird policy of these so-called unionist parties actually going for Brexit, which is going to break up the union. I mean, there's no consistency. But then, I suppose the longer I live, the more I realise that people don't think through the next consequences of policies they're pursuing in short-term political thing. They think in terms of the headlines of the next week. Their staff just advise them, how you can win the ratings for this week's television shows. They never think about long-term policy implications. And it's really frustrating to watch as these mistakes are made. It's like watching a poker game and you can see everybody's hand. You can see the folly of these different moves. DUP completely misplayed their hand and have betrayed the entire concept of unionism. And I discuss in the newsletter that Sinn Féin policy, I mean, they've played a much more skillful hand because ultimately they're working for the reunification of Ireland as one nation within the EU. And they're guaranteed that by law under the Good Friday Agreement. If the UK government tries to ignore that, tear it up and implement their hard Brexit, which is what Boris Johnson is trying to do, I predict there would be a resumption of armed struggle on the island of Ireland, because these people are not to mess around with. And we swore that Good Friday Agreement, all of us, on all sides. If the UK Brexiteer fanatics tear it all up, it will lead to conflict, which is apparently the thing that made Theresa May back off a hard Brexit. Finally, her advisors actually managed to get that through into her head. She seemed to me the least intelligent Prime Minister for a long time, the most rude, actually, in her behaviour. She complained that, she was extremely rude to Mr Corbyn, and with this supercilious attitude of, I'm the schoolmistress, mistress, I know what's best. Absolute nonsense. She was completely out of her depth and elevated way beyond her station into that position, and for 3 years wasted what should have been immediately an altered policy. No, we're not doing Brexit. It's completely wrong and against the interests of the Northern Irish, the Scottish and UK state. If she'd have been at all intelligent, she would have said that the day she was made Prime Minister. Oh, dearie dear. So, yes, I discuss all that. Then I talk about Wales and give that view. I talk about the fact that, the Welsh are not happy at all about Brexit. And really, the Welsh take a long time to get cross. But I assure you, when they do, they do. And it's just, the Welsh are intelligent people. I had a volunteer come from Aberystwyth who worked here for 2 weeks with me. And we had long discussions about the Welsh view on things, and I used to live in Wales for 10 years. I'm kind of Welsh by adoption as well, and I love Powys where I live, but I also love the whole of Wales, and I know it's totally against Welsh national interest to have Brexit in any shape or form. Wales is a European country, and the Tudor dynasty and the great intellectuals of Wales have always been outward-looking global thinkers, and in Brittany and elsewhere in Celtic Europe, we love the Welsh for their Celticness. It's a pan-European thing, this Celtic thing, and not just, it's not about nationalism, it's about pan-tribalism. And that's why, I'm speaking as Archdruid of the European Peace Druids here. Then we have the church's policies. I talk about this from a Christian perspective. Christ was a pan-sophist, a European, international, Middle Eastern, transpersonal teacher of wisdom with his disciples, all of them, and not, a petty little nationalist, like let's have just our little tribe to be saved. No, he was a bigger thinker, and that's why it was adopted and became the most important religious tradition in European history, apart from paganism, which was around much, much longer. Okay, then I talk about the constitutional dilemmas for the UK caused by all this Brexit nonsense. I talk about the fact that the dark money has been flooding into Europe and Britain, funded by hard right-wing groups in America and elsewhere, Saudi Arabia and Israel, where there's this really weird confluence been going on between the hard right. Most people don't know, but because I did my PhD on the Cold War and its intellectual story, I discovered this thing called the World Anti-Communist League that was active in the 60s and 70s, funded by hard right-wing groups in fascist groups in South America who were involved in the hard right-wing death squads that were roaming around Latin America. And a lot of it, then they did an alliance with Saudi Arabian money, because the Saudi Arabians became very, very anti-communist. So they created this World Anti-Communist League. And they did alliances with very strange people, extreme hard right-wing groups, some of whom have been ex-Nazis. And they adopted the anti-Bolshevik ideology of the Nazi movement, which is basically anything goes as long as you're bashing communists. You can break every rule under the universe because you've got to get the communists. So there was this weird alliance. Now then it penetrated into American intelligence and American policy formulation. And the USA I'm talking about. And the whole of the USA policy establishment and military security establishment shifted right-wingwards. Kennedy was assassinated, it seems, by some of these fanatical far-right groups. And ever since they've been holding the American presidential, people within a certain limit of what's acceptable behaviour. If you stray outside, all hell breaks out. So there's a huge struggle going on. And of course these people are billionaires, a lot of them. Well, we have to stand up to them. In Europe we don't accept that hard right-wing ideology. And since Brexit is their baby, that's why we don't accept it. And I refuse to allow my country, Britain, which is a haven of freedom of thought, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, liberal traditions, to be then swamped by all this hate speech. I also then talk about the impact of all this nightmare on British citizens who are now happily living in Europe like me. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are still British, but they happen to prefer living in Florence or Spain or France or the Netherlands, or they do both. They live and work in both. And that's our right to live here, because we're still British. We are part of this European Union, and we want to be able to go on living here and in Britain whenever we choose. And I want my children to be able to travel around Europe as I did and see the beauties and the adventure and so on. Well, that's our right. We are European citizens. I talk about the Israeli election business, the schedule of Netanyahu's legal processes going on and developments in this last few weeks. He is going to court. It's just a question of how long. Now, some Israeli friends of mine say, "Oh, stop bashing Netanyahu. He's a great man. He stands up for Israel." Okay, I'm sorry to say that I suspect that what he's done is just the tip of the iceberg. I suspect that far more. Bishy, come on, Bishy. Hello, Bishy. Come on, don't be naughty. Yes. Okay, I suspect that there's far more that Netanyahu's been doing than meets the eye, and that yes, the 3 charges against him, they are substantial, but they're not, absolutely cataclysmic. But I'm pretty sure he's done lots of other stuff behind the scenes, which may well come out, like Trump. His impeachment stuff is bad, but I'm sure there's a lot more that much worse. But for me, the worst thing Netanyahu has done is refusing to talk peace with his neighbours, refusing to have any meaningful dialogue with the Palestinians who are hurting, refusing to address the problems. This isn't a proper leader. This is not a leader that we need for the 21st century. This is not a leader that can come to the Paris Peace Forum and look you in the eye and say, look, I'm trying to make peace in my country. No, this is someone that needs, therefore, to be replaced by someone like this Gantz chap who actually understands the importance of dialogue. I then talk about the interesting fact that Islamic voters in the coming general election seem to have quite an important role. The Muslims on the whole tend to be the most charitable in British culture. They're very compassionate. I've had so many Muslim friends, it's just, I've got to know Islam very well. And I've studied and taught Islamic studies, I've taught Sufism, and I've studied and researched the Quran in detail. I've been writing a commentary on it, which is nearly finished. And Islam is about submission to truth, submission to al-Haq, the one, the true, the absolute. Philosophically, I'm with Mullah Sadra and Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and the great philosophical traditions of Islam. There is no way under any Islamic philosophy that you can justify Brexit. It's the breaking up of a once beautiful country. It's the turning away from the solidarity of the pan-European ideal and the culture of peace that is premised on that. It will reacerbate the old wounds and reactivate, the old blood, swells that used to happen in Europe. And so, no, from an Islamic perspective, it is utterly unthinkable to vote for Brexit. And so I've pointed this out in this section of the newsletter. I also write about the impact of Brexit on the UK population of EU nationals who've settled there happily, who are working away in the NHS and other things. Again, it's a total destabilisation which should be reversed, and it's shocking. People are so upset about this. I talk about the role of the monarchy in all this. Queen Elizabeth II, who I've had the honour of having some minor dealings with on occasion through the Commonwealth Interfaith Forum, and I believe personally she cannot be in support of Brexit. She's not a fool. She's an intelligent woman. I think her position is that she is forced to go along with whatever the lead party says. I've exchanged correspondence with her, and that's what essentially her secretary informed me. I think there's a lot of constitutional, interpretative wiggle room here, and I think at the end of the day, actually, the monarch has a duty to say to, a party pursuing the wrong policy, that policy is wrong. She has actually a constitutional duty to point that out. And so, anyway, discuss. Now, if she doesn't, and if she refuses to, and let's just say for 1 second, she